My phone buzzes against the metal nurse's station counter, the fraud alert notification cutting through the steady beep of monitors in the ICU. 12 hours into my shift, my eyes burn from fatigue as I tap the screen. The number that appears makes my stomach drop. $7,250. Unauthorized charge. I nearly drop my stethoscope, my hands suddenly trembling as I read further. 5 airline tickets to Santorini, purchased today. I scroll through the transaction details, each name appearing like a slap. Richard and Lillian Vale, Spencer and Reagan Vale, and Megan Tanner, Reagan's best friend since college. My name is nowhere on the list. The final detail hits like a blow to the chest. The transaction used my own credit card. Just last week, I sat at my parents' gleaming cherrywood dining table, watching Mom fold her linen napkin with perfect hospital corners. Her voice had been casual, almost bored. Tickets are $1,450 each. If you can't afford that, it's best you sit this one out. I had nodded, swallowing around the lump in my throat, not admitting that after covering Spencer's car repair last month, my savings were thin. Their dismissal had stung, but this was theft. That night I'd returned to work, staring at patient charts while fighting back tears. Dr. Stevens had passed me in the hallway, his eyes catching mine before quickly looking away. He'd seen this before Corinne, returning from family gatherings with red-rimmed eyes, throwing herself into her work, as though she could scrub away disappointment with antiseptic and focused care. Now, standing in the same hospital corridor, I unlock my phone with steady purpose. The trembling in my hands subsides as I call the credit card company, locking my account and filing a dispute. The representative's voice is soothing, validating. "This is clearly fraud, Miss Vale. We'll handle it." My phone chirps with an incoming text half an hour after I end the call. "Spencer, something's wrong with the tickets. Can you fix it?" I stand straighter, shoulders back, as I type. "Like you said, I stayed behind." The hospital corridor suddenly feels different, brighter somehow. I change every password I have, from banking apps to email accounts. My Amazon account, where they'd clearly stored my credit card information. My Apple ID. Everything. A weight lifts from my chest as I tuck my phone away and return to my patients. Mr. Jenkins needs his medication, and Mrs. Torres will want an update on her husband's surgery. Their needs are clear, honest, unlike my family's Torres. Within an hour, my phone vibrates continuously in my pocket. Missed calls from Mom, Dad, Spencer, Reagan. Voicemails stack up alongside increasingly frantic texts. "What's wrong with you?" "Dad's furious. They're going to miss their flight." I silence my phone, sliding it into my locker during my brief lunch break. My hands no longer shake. Instead, a strange calm settles over me as I realize what's at stake. I'll be the difficult daughter now, the one who ruined the family trip, the ungrateful nurse who doesn't understand what family means. For the first time, I see it clearly. I've never been their daughter or sister. I've been their financial safety net, the responsible one they call when bills come due or emergencies arise, the one who gives and gives while they take and take. Standing before my locker, I press my palm against the cool metal. "Not anymore," I whisper, the words a promise to myself. By the time my shift ends, there are 17 missed calls, 9 voicemails, and 32 text messages. I delete them all without listening or reading, the weight of obligation falling away with each tap of my finger. Tomorrow, they'll try again. They'll escalate. They'll manipulate. But tonight, for the first time in years, I drive home without their voices in my head telling me what I owe them. My apartment feels hollow tonight, the silence broken only by the hum of my refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. 3 days have passed since I locked my credit card and changed all my passwords. I've been screening calls, deleting voicemails, and working extra shifts to avoid thinking about what comes next. The call from my bank changes everything. "Miss Vale, we've completed our preliminary investigation," says Marcus, the fraud specialist I've been working with. His voice carries a note of concern that makes my stomach tighten. "There's something you should know about the Santorini charges." I sit heavily on my couch, one hand clutching my phone, the other pressed against my chest. "What did you find?" "The authorized user account that made those purchases, it belongs to Spencer Vale." My breathing exercises fail me as my heart races against my ribs. That's impossible. I removed Spencer as an authorized user 2 years ago when he got married. According to our records, the account was reactivated 4 months ago through our online portal using your login credentials. The room tilts slightly. Not an impulse theft. Not a desperate moment. 4 months of planning, of deliberate deception. From my own brother. There's more. Marcus continues, his voice gentle now. We found a pattern of smaller purchases dating back to when the account was reactivated. Electronics stores, restaurants, sporting goods. I press my eyes shut as memories flash through my mind like a sickening slideshow. The lease I co-signed for Spencer's first apartment, the emergency loan when Reagan's car broke down, the expensive birthday gifts I couldn't afford but bought anyway because that's what family does. 12 years of financial support, culminating in theft. The total unauthorized charges, including the airline tickets, come to $9,540. My breathing steadies as something hardens inside me. Thank you, Marcus. I want to pursue this to the fullest extent. We'll continue our investigation, Miss Vale. In the meantime. My phone beeps with an incoming call. Mom. Again. I need to go. I tell Marcus. Please email me your findings. I switch to Mom's call, putting it on speaker as I stand and walk to my living room window. Rain patters against the glass, distorting the streetlights below into watery stars. Corinne, this has gone on long enough. Mom's voice fills my apartment, sharp with impatience. Your father and I have been trying to reach you for days. I've been busy. The rain intensifies, matching my mood. Too busy to respond to your family? Spencer and Reagan are devastated about their trip. Their trip on my credit card. Dad's voice cuts in. Honey, this is all just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I repeat, watching raindrops race down my window. Is that what we're calling fraud now? You're overreacting, Dad says, his tone dismissive. These things happen in families. Theft happens in families? Good to know. Spencer's voice joins the chorus. Sis, I meant to ask you first. Things got hectic with planning, and I just stole $9,000 from me? My voice remains steady, surprising me. It wasn't like that. Reagan's tearful voice pierces through. You're ruining everything for everyone because you're jealous. You always do this, make everything about you when we're trying to be happy. I press my forehead against the cool glass. How long have you known Spencer was using my card, Mom? The silence stretches until Mom clears her throat. Well, he mentioned borrowing it for some small things. We assumed you were aware. You assumed. The rain blurs the world outside, matching my vision. Is this how you repay everything we've done for you? Mom's voice hardens. After all the sacrifices we made? Your father's retirement party is next month. How will this look? I turn away from the window. Like theft has consequences? Don't be dramatic, Dad interjects. Remember who co-signed your nursing school loans. This family has always supported you. The threat isn't subtle. I sit at my kitchen table, calculating exactly what financial independence will cost. Refinancing my loans, possibly changing jobs, if Dad makes calls to his hospital board friends, finding a new apartment my family doesn't have keys to. You need help, Corinne, Spencer says, his voice dripping with concern that doesn't reach his words. I'm worried about you. Everyone at the hospital knows how hard you've been working. If they heard about this mental breakdown. Don't threaten me, Spencer. My voice comes out low and dangerous, startling even myself. My phone chirps with an email notification. From Marcus. Subject line, fraud investigation, confirmation. I need to go. I say, cutting off whatever new manipulation was coming. The bank's fraud department just confirmed my dispute is valid. They're launching a full investigation. I end the call before they can respond, opening the email instead. Official letterhead, case number, confirmation that all charges will be reversed pending investigation. As I set my phone down that night, I wonder if I should simply distance myself from my family or formally document every penny they've taken. Cutting ties might bring immediate peace, but creating a record might force accountability. What would you do when those who should protect you become the ones you need protection from? 2 days later, the supervisor's office feels smaller than usual as she slides a printed email across her desk. The fluorescent lights cast shadows under her eyes, making her concern look more like suspicion. Your mother called yesterday. Director Palmer taps the paper with her French-tipped nail. She's worried about your mental health. The words land like a slap. I keep my face neutral, though my pulse quickens. My mental health is fine. She mentioned erratic behavior, mood swings. Director Palmer studies me with the same careful assessment she uses for unstable patients. Said you've been working too many shifts. I work exactly the hours I'm scheduled. My voice remains steady, despite the heat rising up my neck. Plus the occasional voluntary overtime. She suggested you might be having a breakdown from overwork. Of course she did. I picture Mom on the phone, voice honeyed with concern, while systematically undermining my credibility at the one place I feel competent and valued. My performance reviews are excellent, I say. My patient care is uncompromised. Director Palmer nods slowly. That's why I found the call. Concerning? I leave her office with my evaluation signed exceeds expectations in every category, but my hands tremble with rage as I turn my phone back on. 3 missed calls from Aunt Judith, 1 from my cousin Melissa. A text from Dad's golf buddy asking if everything's okay. Spencer's social media updates flash on my screen. Some family ties are more like chains. Toxic people never admit when they're the problem. Reagan's tearful selfie beneath it has 17 sympathetic comments. They're building a fortress of manufactured concern around me, and it's working. Back home, I check my accounts, a habit that now sends my heart racing. The emergency fund I've maintained since nursing school has dwindled by almost $4,000. Connected accounts. Automatic transfers I never authorized. I sink onto my bed, breathing exercises failing to slow my galloping pulse. For 3 years, I've covered Spencer's car insurance, just until he gets that promotion. Last Christmas, I paid for Mom's knee surgery copay when Dad was temporarily short, Reagan's graduate school application fees. Each night, I lie awake, calculating the total. $9,540, and counting. The number cycles through my mind at 3 a.m. when sleep should come. At 4 a.m., I finally drift off, only to jolt awake an hour later, wondering what else they've taken that I haven't discovered yet. I start keeping meticulous records. Every check I've written, every Venmo transfer with a cheerful emoji that masked my growing resentment, every credit card charge that wasn't mine. Just gathering documentation for my accountant, I tell the bank representative who helps me access 2 years of transaction history later that morning. His eyes hold a flash of recognition he's seen this before. My phone continues to buzz with concerned relatives. Each night, I record audio notes in a password-protected app. The 12th of April. Spencer claimed his checking account was frozen due to suspected fraud. Borrowed $600 for rent. Still hasn't repaid despite 3 promotions since then. May 29th. Mom suggested I was being obsessive about money when I mentioned Spencer's unpaid loans. The 8th of July. Dad claimed he never heard about Spencer using my credit card until now, despite being at the airport with him when the charges were declined. The recording keeps my thoughts ordered, when their voices threaten to drown out my own certainty. Wednesday morning next week, I arrive for my shift to find a coffee cup on the nurse's station counter with my name written on it. Doctor. Stevens nods from across the corridor, his silver hair catching the light. Under the cup is a folded note. Whatever you're going through, you're handling it with grace. Some family trees need pruning to stay healthy. The small kindness nearly breaks me. I tuck the note into my pocket and carry its weight like armor through my shift. That evening, a knock at my apartment door makes my stomach clench. Through the peephole, I see Dad's weathered face, the familiar creases around his eyes deeper than usual. Your mother sent me to reason with you, he says as soon as I open the door, not bothering with hello. This whole thing is getting out of hand. I step back, allowing him in but maintaining distance. It got out of hand when you watched Spencer steal from me and said nothing. Dad sighs heavily, setting his keys on my counter with the presumption of someone who expects to stay a while. Look, I know Spencer made a mistake. A mistake is accidental. He deliberately used my card for months. He's offering to pay back half, Dad says, like he's presenting a generous settlement. We can smooth this over before your mother's birthday next month. I laugh, the sound hollow even to my own ears. Half of money that was stolen from me. He's family, Corinne. So am I. The words come out stronger than I expected. I'm not angry that you need help. I'm angry that you took without asking. Dad's face shifts, surprise replacing his practiced patience. We didn't. You did, all of you, for years. I realize as I say it that it's true this isn't about one credit card charge. It's about a lifetime of being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who gives until there's nothing left. We're your family, Dad repeats, as if the word alone should erase everything. Family asks, Family respects boundaries. Family doesn't drain someone's emergency fund and then call their boss to question their mental stability. Dad leaves without the reconciliation he came for, and I slide the deadbolt behind him with a finality that feels like freedom. The next morning, my phone pings with an unexpected message from Elise, Spencer's ex-wife. I saw Spencer's posts. You should know he did the same to me. I have records of everything if you need them. Dr. Stevens catches me in the hallway later that day. We're short-staffed next weekend. Double time for the overnight shifts if you're interested. I notice he doesn't ask why I need the money or offer sympathy, just practical support with no strings attached. The contrast to my family's constant demands is startling. That night, I open a fresh spreadsheet. Line by line, I document every loan, every gift, every financial contribution I've made to my family over the years. The final figure, $9,540, stares back at me, a precise accounting of years of financial manipulation. As I work, an email arrives from Aunt Judith. Needed to discuss some inconsistencies in the family trust accounts. Call me when you can. My finger hovers over the share button on my spreadsheet, the family group chat one click away. For the first time in years, I feel not just anger, but power, the clean, clarifying power of truth backed by evidence. The invoice is ready to send. The sun streams through my kitchen window as I finalize the invoice. I'm using accounting software from the hospital's financial literacy workshop designed for billing insurance companies, not family members. Each entry appears in crisp, professional formatting. Dates, descriptions, amounts, all categorized with clinical precision. My fingers hover over the keyboard, steady now, unlike when I discovered the credit card theft. As of the 1st of June, I will no longer be contributing financially to the family. Repayment is expected within 45 business days. I type the words and attach the PDF. $9,540. Every cent accounted for, every loan documented. I hit send before I can second-guess myself, watching the email whoosh away to 5 recipients. Mom, Dad, Spencer, Reagan, and Aunt Martha, who manages the family trust. My phone rings within minutes. I ignore it, focusing instead on forwarding Elise's evidence to Aunt Martha in a separate email. Spencer's ex-wife had messaged me last night with bank statements showing a pattern of financial manipulation dating back years. I should have shown you these when we were still married. She wrote, I was afraid no one would believe me. Aunt Martha's response arrives while I'm packing an overnight bag. I've noticed financial irregularities in Spencer's trust withdrawals. This explains quite a bit. Can we speak when you return? A weight lifts from my shoulders as I book a weekend getaway to Asheville, a small bed and breakfast nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains. 3 hours away, just far enough to be unreachable. I power down my phone before pulling out of my apartment complex, savoring the silence. The family chaos erupts while I'm gone. Dr. Stevens gives me the highlights when I return to work Monday morning, his salt and pepper eyebrows raised over reading glasses. Your brother has been busy, he says, sliding a coffee across the nurse's station. He's telling everyone you doctored those financial records to make him look bad. I take a sip, unsurprised. Let me guess, it backfired? Spectacularly. That ex-wife of his, Elise? She posted additional evidence to the family group chat. Bank statements, text messages, the works. Your cousin Caroline called me looking for you. Said she always wondered where your brother's money came from. I shake my head, remembering Mom's frantic voicemails. 8 of them waited when I turned my phone back on, each more desperate than the last. She'd apparently launched an emotional campaign, calling relatives to rally support against my cruel treatment of Spencer. The result? 5 separate family members contacted me privately expressing support. Uncle David's text was particularly satisfying. About time someone called them out. Your grandfather would be proud. That's not even the best part, Dr. Stevens continues, lowering his voice. The bank called Spencer for an interview about potential fraud patterns. I should feel victorious. Instead, a hollow ache spreads beneath my ribs as I realize how thoroughly my family's financial house of cards is collapsing. Later that evening, as I pack for another weekend away, this time to a lakeside cabin with actual fishing, I wonder if seeking full repayment is enough, or if I need to permanently distance myself from people who saw me as a resource rather than a daughter and sister. Would you sever ties completely, or maintain limited contact? The next week brings unexpected allies. Elise sends additional bank statements, highlighting dates when Spencer withdrew money immediately before I loaned him similar amounts. The pattern is unmistakable once laid bare. I kept these records because our divorce attorney needed them, she explains over coffee. I never thought they'd help you too. Aunt Martha calls next. I've temporarily frozen Spencer's access to certain accounts pending a full review, she says, her voice carrying the crisp authority that always intimidated me as a child. This isn't just about you, Corinne. The trust has fiduciary responsibilities. The most surprising call comes from HR at Dad's former accounting firm. Miss Vale, we're reviewing some historical expense reports filed by Emery Vale that show concerning patterns. We understand you've recently raised questions about family financial practices. Would you be willing to answer a few questions? I agree, providing only factual responses, neither defending nor condemning my father. The conversation leaves me nauseous but resolute. The family's financial house of cards continues its collapse throughout the week. Each new revelation should bring satisfaction, but I feel only a dull, persistent ache when I think about what we've become. I take extra shifts at the hospital, finding comfort in the straightforward problems of patient care. Reagan's social media campaign begins Thursday. First come vague posts about unfair treatment and family betrayal. By Saturday, she's sharing tearful videos describing their sudden financial hardship and how they might have to cancel their anniversary trip to Maui. Dad loses his consulting privileges at his former firm after their investigation concludes. He doesn't call to tell me I learned from Uncle David, who sounds more disappointed than surprised. The most unexpected development arrives in a series of text messages from extended family members. Cousin Caroline, I had no idea what was happening. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. Uncle Robert, your grandmother would be horrified at how they've treated you. Aunt Susan, we should have intervened years ago. Mom's message comes last, surprisingly brief after weeks of emotional tirades. We need to resolve this once and for all. Family dinner, Sunday at 5. Your father and I will cook. I stare at the screen, sensing the final confrontation approaching. For the first time in years, I feel no obligation to say yes. On Sunday, I arrive at my parents' house 15 minutes early, parking across the street rather than in the driveway. The April sun warms my face through the windshield as I review my notes one last time. Each figure, each date, each transaction, meticulously documented. I've prepared for this meeting, like I would for the most critical patient handoff. My phone buzzes with a text from Mom. We're ready whenever you are. Ready. As if this were a casual family dinner instead of what it truly is, their last attempt to maintain control. When I enter through the front door, the forced normalcy hits me first. Dad's reading glasses perched on the coffee table beside his worn leather recliner. Mom's fresh-cut tulips arranged in the crystal vase I gave her 3 Christmases ago. The familiar scent of lemon furniture polish. Spencer and Reagan sit stiffly on the sofa, their usual sprawl replaced by perfect posture. Spencer's hair is neatly combed, Reagan's makeup subdued. This calculated presentation isn't lost on me. Corinne, Mom says, her smile tight as she motions to the armchair facing all of them. Thank you for coming. We've been so worried. I take the seat, setting my messenger bag beside me. I appreciate the concern. Dad clears his throat, fingers tapping a nervous rhythm against his knee. We think there's been a misunderstanding about the credit card situation. A misunderstanding? I repeat, the word hollow. We'd like to propose a compromise, Spencer says, leaning forward with uncharacteristic earnestness. We can arrange partial repayment of the airline tickets if you'll drop this whole investigation. Mom nods eagerly. It's what's best for moving forward together as a family. As a family, Dad echoes, his gaze skittering away from mine. I let the silence stretch between us until Mom shifts uncomfortably in her seat. You know, she says finally, voice dropping to a concerned whisper. Dr. Hendricks mentioned you've been under tremendous stress at the hospital lately. Sometimes stress can make us vindictive about small misunderstandings. The familiar heat rises in my chest, but this time, I welcome it. This anger has become my compass. I brought something to share with you, I say, reaching into my bag. I pull out a leather portfolio, my graduation gift from Dad when I finished nursing school, and place it on the coffee table. Inside is a stack of papers, organized by date, credit card statements, bank transfers, text messages. Each page represents a moment when my family treated my financial stability as their emergency fund. This is 8 years of financial manipulation. I say, voice steady as I lay out the pages one by one. Spencer's car repair, Reagan's boutique debt, the property tax you couldn't cover last year, Dad. Their eyes track my hands as I arrange the evidence between us. I've found a new apartment, I continue. One you don't have keys to. Spencer's jaw tightens. Corinne, I've refinanced my nursing school loans without your co-signatures, I add, looking directly at my father. The paperwork was finalized yesterday. Mom's face pales. You can't possibly afford the interest rate on your own. I can, and I do. I straighten the edges of the papers. I don't need to prove myself to people who see my success as their safety net. Dad's shoulders slump. We never meant. This isn't about money. I interrupt, surprising myself with my calm. It's about respect. It's about boundaries. You've taught me that I'm only valuable to this family when I'm useful. Dad looks up, something shifting in his expression. We've taken advantage of your reliability, he admits quietly. For years. Mom shoots him a warning glance, but he doesn't look away from me. I stand, walk to the entryway table, and retrieve my set of house keys from my pocket. The metal feels cold against my palm as I place them on the polished wood with a soft click. What are you doing? Mom demands, rising to her feet. Setting boundaries. After everything we've done for you, she says, voice trembling. The dance lessons, the college application fees, That's the problem, I cut in. You think basic parental support was a loan I need to repay forever. The silence that follows feels electric. Spencer stares at the floor, then looks up with reddened eyes. I used your card without permission. He confesses, voice cracking. Not just for the tickets. For months. I knew your Amazon password. I set up autofill for your card information. Reagan's composure finally breaks. I knew about it, she whispers. We both did. Your card was declined at the airport because we'd already maxed it out on other things. I absorbed this final betrayal with unexpected steadiness. And you, I say, turning to Dad. Did you know too? He nods once, unable to meet my eyes. I can't do this anymore, I tell them, retrieving my portfolio but leaving the keys. I deserve better than being your ATM. As I reach the door, Dad calls after me. Will we see you again? I pause, hand on the doorknob. That depends on whether you want a daughter or a bank account. The door closes softly behind me. I walk to my car without looking back, the weight of their expectations finally lifted from my shoulders. 3 weeks later, rumors reach me through hospital gossip. Spencer's facing potential fraud charges from his own bank, apparently. My credit card wasn't the only one he'd been using. Mom and Dad have gone silent, their usual weekly calls conspicuously absent. Dad shows up at my new apartment on a rainy Tuesday evening. His eyes are bloodshot as he stands in my doorway, refusing to come inside. I enabled all of it. He says simply, I should have protected you, not used you. I'm sorry, Corinne. I accept his words with a nod but make no promises. The following month, a certified envelope arrives at my apartment. Inside is a check for exactly $9,540, the precise amount from my invoice. No note accompanies it. None is needed. As I place the check on my kitchen counter, I realize with startling clarity that freedom isn't about forgiveness. Sometimes, it's about finally being seen. 3 months later, the light streams through uncovered windows in my new apartment, casting warm patterns across freshly painted walls. No more of the murky beige that had surrounded me for years now. Vibrant teal and sunny yellow brighten every corner. I hang a watercolor landscape, one I painted myself last weekend, adjacent to the window where morning light hits it perfectly. My phone chimes from the kitchen counter. For the first time in months, my shoulders don't tense at the sound. No more dread when checking notifications. No more anxiety about unexpected charges or family demands. How's the new place looking? Doctor. Stevens texts, with a photo of houseplants from the hospital gift shop. I send him a quick photo of my expanding collection, already thriving on my eastern-facing balcony. Beyond the plants, Denver's skyline glimmers in the distance. After my shift tonight, I'm leading a financial literacy workshop for new nurses. Protecting your financial health while caring for others seemed like the perfect topic after everything I've learned. Already, 3 younger nurses have scheduled private consultations about family financial boundaries. My easel stands in the corner, no longer collecting dust in storage. Last night, I stayed up until 2, working on a landscape of the Colorado mountains where I'll be hiking this weekend. The freedom to lose myself in painting again feels almost decadent after years of not enough time. My phone chimes again. This time, it's a family group text, another Vale family gathering next weekend. Mom has included me in the invitation list, her first attempt at contact since the check arrived. I type a simple response. Thank you for thinking of me. I have other plans that weekend. No apologies, no elaborate excuses, just a clear, calm boundary. Instead, I'll be meeting Jonah for dinner at that new restaurant overlooking the river, our third date. The anesthesiologist's calm presence and direct communication style have been refreshing after years of navigating my family's emotional minefields. Last week over coffee, he asked about my family. The question didn't trigger my usual anxiety. We're taking some space from each other right now, I told him, surprised by how easily the words came. They crossed some boundaries I needed to establish. He nodded, understanding without demanding details. Family relationships can be complicated. Doesn't mean they're bad people or that you don't love them. Exactly, I replied, grateful for his perception. I'm just learning that love doesn't have to cost me my peace. Tonight, Elise, doctor. Stevens and my aunt are coming over to celebrate what Elise jokingly calls my financial independence day. A small gathering of people who supported me when I needed it most, expecting nothing in return. My aunt called yesterday to confirm she was bringing dessert. I have something for you, she mentioned. Just a small gift to mark the occasion. When they arrive, her package sits on my new coffee table, a framed calligraphy quote. You are not responsible for other people's comfort at the cost of your peace. The words shimmer against a watercolor background in my favorite blues and greens. We toast with sparkling cider in my new glasses. To boundaries that protect peace, Dr. Stevens offers, and people who respect them. 2. The next morning, I drive to Denver Memorial Hospital's foundation office. The woman behind the desk looks surprised when I hand her a check for exactly $9,540. I'd like this to establish a scholarship for nursing students who are supporting family members. I explain. Sometimes the caregivers need care too. Walking back to my car, I feel lighter than I have in years. On my dashboard sits my confirmation for the Advanced Cardiac Certification program I've applied for, alongside a brochure for the Telluride weekend Jonah suggested for next month. Back home, I pause before the shadow box hanging in my living room, the cashed check from my family mounted beside my old house keys. Not a trophy of victory, but a reminder of growth. Standing on my balcony, I water my new plants as morning light spills across the city. As I watch the sunrise from my own space, I wonder if forgiveness is always necessary for healing, or if sometimes the best closure is simply moving forward without looking back. What would you choose?
The morning of the interview that would change my entire life, my mother blocked the front door with her body. She crossed her arms and told me my sister had a bottomless brunch to attend with her friends. She said I was staying home to watch my niece and nephew. When I pleaded that this job interview was my only way out of a minimum wage, my father just laughed from his leather recliner. He told me that girls like me do not get lives, we get duties. My sister walked down the stairs completely ignoring my tears and dropped a heavy diaper bag right onto my bare feet. I did not cry or scream. I simply stepped over the bag, walked out the back door, and never returned. 8 years passed before they summoned me back. I am Simone, 33 years old, and today I am the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Financial Analytics. My family had absolutely no idea I built a corporate empire from the ground up. They just thought I was finally ready to be their doormat again. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to walk away from a toxic family to build your own success. I was sitting in the back of my chauffeur-driven SUV reviewing the final legal terms of a massive corporate merger. The leather seats were perfectly quiet, the city lights of Chicago blurring past the tinted windows as my team prepared for our biggest acquisition yet. My phone buzzed on the center console. It was a text message from Patricia, the woman I used to call Mom. Family dinner tonight at Le Petit. The message read, "Your sister Brittany is getting a massive promotion because her retail company is being bought out by a major tech firm. Bring your checkbook. It is time you paid us back for skipping out on your family 8 years ago." My chief financial officer was sitting across from me in the SUV. He glanced at the glowing screen and advised me to ignore the message. We had a multi-million-dollar acquisition to finalize that very evening, and he knew my family history. But looking at those demanding words, I felt the phantom weight of that diaper bag hitting my feet 8 years ago. The sheer audacity of them demanding my money after giving me absolutely nothing but grief sparked a familiar fire in my chest. I thought about how Patricia and Richard had funded Brittany through college and paid for her lavish wedding while I was forced to work night shifts just to buy used textbooks. I told my driver to reroute the car to Le Petit. I walked into the high-end French restaurant wearing a plain beige trench coat. I deliberately pulled the long sleeve of my cashmere sweater down to conceal the $80,000 Patek Philippe watch resting on my wrist. I wanted to let them think I was still the struggling, desperate girl they had tried to break all those years ago. The maitre d' led me through the dining room to a private VIP area in the back. My family was already there, being incredibly loud and taking up entirely too much space. Brittany was wearing a flashy designer dress that screamed new money and poor taste. Beside her sat her husband Malik. He was a tall, handsome African-American man, dressed in a velvet dinner jacket, but his entire personality revolved around pretending to be a wealthy investor. As I walked in, he was loudly boasting to the waiter about his crypto portfolio and guaranteed digital yields. My parents, Patricia and Richard, were beaming at them from across the table like they were absolute royalty. I pulled out a chair and sat down at the far end of the long table. The conversation stopped immediately. No one stood up to hug me. No one asked how my health was or where I had been living for the better part of a decade. They just stared at me with the exact same disdain they had always shown. Patricia looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my plain trench coat with obvious disappointment. She muttered something under her breath about how I still did not know how to dress for a nice occasion. I kept my face entirely neutral, waiting for the real reason they had demanded my presence. Before the waiter could even step forward to pour my ice water, Richard reached inside his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers and tossed it across the white linen tablecloth. The heavy packet slid to a halt right in front of my empty dinner plate. I glanced down at the bold black letters on the first page. It was a commercial loan guarantor document for exactly $150,000. "Sign it right now," Richard commanded, not even bothering to look me in the eye or offer a greeting. "Malik has all his investments temporarily tied up in digital assets, and Brittany needs to host a lavish networking party for her new corporate overlords at Lux Retail to secure her new vice president title. We agreed you are going to co-sign this loan to float them the cash. It is time you finally paid this family back for the roof we put over your head and the food you ate growing up." I stared at the thick stack of legal papers sitting next to my empty plate. The sheer entitlement radiating from my father was almost suffocating, but before I could even formulate a response, Malik leaned back in his chair and aggressively swirled his whiskey. He shot me a condescending smile that made my skin crawl. He adjusted his velvet jacket and loudly announced that his crypto investments were currently yielding a guaranteed 20% return. He spoke with the unearned confidence of a man who watched 2 online tutorials and suddenly believed he was a Wall Street hedge fund manager. He claimed his assets were locked in a high-yield digital vault for the next quarter. He actually had the nerve to tell me that letting me co-sign his loan was a massive favor. He said it would help build my non-existent credit score. Right on cue, Brittany thrust her left hand across the table, making sure the restaurant's crystal chandeliers caught the light of her massive new diamond ring. It was a gaudy, ostentatious stone that screamed desperation. She dramatically sighed and complained about how exhausted she was from her grueling corporate schedule at Lux Retail. She bragged that her company was days away from finalizing a buyout by a massive tech conglomerate. She needed this $150,000 loan to throw an elite networking gala. She insisted that hosting this lavish party was the only way to guarantee the mysterious new CEO would hand her the senior vice president title she so clearly deserved. I looked at the diamond ring. I looked at Malik's smug face. Then I looked at the loan guarantor document. I placed my index finger on the thick packet and slowly pushed it right back across the white linen tablecloth. I am not signing anything, I said, my voice barely above a whisper but hard as concrete. The table went entirely silent. The smug smiles vanished from Brittany and Malik's faces. My father's jaw tightened, his face flushing a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. Patricia slammed her wineglass down so hard the stem nearly snapped. "You ungrateful little brat," Patricia hissed, leaning across the table with venom in her eyes. "We gave you everything and you abandoned this family. If you do not pick up that pen and sign your name right now, I will pick up my phone and call the police. I will tell them exactly who stole your grandmother's vintage emerald brooch 8 years ago. We let it slide back then because you were family, but I have no problem pressing grand larceny charges against you today." The air in my lungs turned to ice, but I kept my posture perfectly straight. The sheer audacity of her threat brought a rush of bitter memories flooding back to my mind. I remembered tearing my childhood bedroom apart, desperately searching for that heirloom brooch. I remembered the exact moment Patricia miraculously found it hidden at the bottom of my laundry hamper. I also remembered what happened the very next morning. My parents used that manufactured theft as the perfect excuse to legally drain my entire college savings account. They emptied the fund I had worked for years to build and used every single penny to pay for Brittany's extravagant destination wedding in Cabo. They framed me, robbed me blind, and played the victims. They still thought I was that terrified, helpless 20-something girl who would easily crumble under their psychological warfare. They thought the threat of police involvement would make me beg for their mercy. Instead of panicking, I raised my hand and calmly signaled the waiter. The young man rushed over in a crisp white shirt holding a silver tray with a leather billfold. The timing was impeccable. He awkwardly glanced at the tense faces around the table before placing the bill down. My father immediately pointed a rigid finger at me. "Give the check to her." Richard barked at the waiter. "Since she wants to act so high and mighty and refuse to help her own sister, she can pay for the dinner." I pulled the leather folder toward me and glanced at the receipt. $3,200. They had ordered vintage champagne, imported truffles, and prime steaks before I even walked through the front door. They fully intended to ambush me with the loan and saddle me with the dinner bill. Patricia crossed her arms, a triumphant smirk returning to her lips. She fully expected me to burst into tears. She expected me to admit I could never afford a $3,000 dinner on a minimum wage salary. She expected me to surrender. I reached into the deep pocket of my plain trench coat. I bypassed my standard corporate cards and pulled out a solid titanium American Express Centurion black card. I placed it onto the silver tray. The heavy metal made a distinct, sharp clink that echoed over the soft jazz playing in the restaurant. The waiter's eyes widened. He quickly bowed his head, took the tray, and rushed toward the payment terminal. My family sat completely paralyzed. Patricia's triumphant smirk dissolved into a mask of pure confusion. She stared at the empty space where the heavy black card had just been. Malik sat up straight, his eyes darting frantically toward the waiter's station. Brittany looked at my coat, trying to comprehend how the sister she viewed as absolute trash could possess an invite-only credit card reserved for the ultra-wealthy. "Where did you get that?" Patricia stammered, her voice shaking with a mix of shock and accusation. "Who did you steal that from? Are you dating some old man? Are you involved in something illegal?" I ignored her frantic questions completely. I did not owe them a single word of explanation about my life, my wealth, or the financial empire I had spent the last 8 years building from the ground up. I waited in perfect, suffocating silence until the waiter returned. He handed me the receipt. I signed my name with a steady hand, added a massive tip for his trouble, and stood up from my chair. I slowly buttoned my trench coat, adjusting the collar with meticulous care. I began to walk toward the exit, but as I passed behind Malik's chair, I stopped. I leaned down, bringing my face right next to his ear so that every single person at the table could hear exactly what I was about to say. "You are not tied up in high-yield crypto, Malik," I said, keeping my tone entirely conversational. You have been funneling borrowed money into leveraged digital assets, and the market just tanked. You are facing a massive margin call from Apex Trading. You owe them over $2 million, and your grace period ends exactly 48 hours from now. If you do not wire the funds by Friday afternoon, they are going to legally seize your house, your cars, and every asset attached to your name. The color instantly drained from Malik's face. He turned a sickly shade of ash gray, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. He could not speak. He could not defend himself. He was absolutely paralyzed by the fact that I knew his deepest, darkest financial secret. Brittany looked at her husband in absolute horror, her gaudy diamond ring suddenly feeling like a very heavy anchor. Patricia and Richard sat frozen in their chairs, the illusion of their perfect, successful son-in-law shattering into a million pieces right in front of their eyes. I stood up straight, smoothed the front of my coat, and walked out the front doors of the restaurant without looking back. The heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung shut behind me, completely cutting off the suffocating air of my family and their manufactured reality. I stepped into the crisp Chicago night and breathed a massive sigh of relief. My driver Thomas was already waiting by the open door of my sleek black SUV. I slid into the quiet sanctuary of the leather back seat, feeling the sharp adrenaline of the confrontation slowly fade into pure calculated focus. For 8 long years, I had prepared for that exact moment. I knew Malik was a total fraud the second I ran a corporate background check on him months ago. Apex Trading was one of my firm's minor subsidiaries. I literally owned his debt. As the car pulled away from the curb and merged into the city traffic, I opened my laptop and went right back to finalizing my latest corporate acquisition. I assumed my parting words would keep my family paralyzed with fear for at least a few days, while Malik scrambled to save his non-existent empire. I severely underestimated Brittany's capacity for petty blind rage. I found out later exactly how the rest of their evening played out. Instead of turning to her husband and demanding to know why he was secretly millions of dollars in debt, Brittany immediately spun a chaotic narrative to protect her fragile ego. She convinced my parents that I was completely delusional. She told Patricia that my titanium credit card was either a highly convincing fake or belonged to some ancient wealthy sugar daddy who was keeping me as a glorified pet to pay for my clothes. In Brittany's mind, there was absolutely no way the sister she had bullied, mocked, and discarded could actually be successful on her own merit. To her, I was still the pathetic girl in the oversized hand-me-down clothes who could be pushed around and forced into submission. Enraged by the public embarrassment I had caused her perfect husband in a 5-star restaurant, Brittany decided she needed to put me back in my proper place. She decided the ultimate revenge would be destroying whatever pathetic little job I had managed to scrape together in the city. Brittany marched into her plush corporate office at Lux Retail the very next morning with a singular, vindictive mission. She used her high-level corporate networking tools and scoured the internet until she found a dormant profile connected to my name. It listed Aegis Financial Analytics as my current employer. Because I highly valued my privacy and security, my public profile deliberately obscured my actual title as founder and CEO. It simply listed me as a financial associate. Brittany took the bait instantly. Assuming Aegis was just some mundane mid-level accounting firm, and that I was nothing more than an expendable low-level assistant, she picked up her desk phone and dialed my company's main human resources hotline. She put on her most authoritative, condescending vice president of marketing voice and demanded to speak with the head of the department. When she was routed to a secure voicemail box, she left a staggering 5-minute recording detailing a completely fabricated history of my supposed crimes. I was sitting in my corner office on the 40th floor reviewing the quarterly profit margins while sipping a black coffee. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, serving as a daily reminder of the empire I had built entirely with my own 2 hands. A gentle knock on the thick frosted glass door broke my concentration. It was Marcus, my vice president of human resources. He was a ruthless, brilliant former corporate litigator who rarely cracked a smile, but today he walked into my suite looking like he was actively struggling to contain absolute hysterics. He held his tablet securely in one hand and closed the door behind him to ensure total privacy. He walked over to my massive mahogany desk and asked if I happened to have an older sister named Brittany. I felt my posture stiffen instantly. I placed my coffee cup down and asked him exactly why he wanted to know. Marcus set his tablets on my desk and explained that a very distressed woman claiming to be an executive at Lux Retail had just left a highly urgent, highly threatening voicemail on the external HR intake line. He pressed play. Brittany's shrill, frantic voice instantly filled my executive suite. She introduced herself with her full corporate title, making sure to emphasize exactly how important she was in the retail sector. Then the lies started flowing like absolute venom. She told my HR department that it was her moral and professional duty to warn them about a severe liability currently hiding in their ranks. She claimed I was a notorious kleptomaniac who had stolen tens of thousands of dollars from my own parents to fund a gambling addiction. She told them I had a documented history of severe mental instability and violent outbursts in previous workplaces. She warned them that if they gave me access to any sensitive financial data or company credit cards, I would absolutely embezzle corporate funds to support my reckless, fraudulent lifestyle. She finished the recording by demanding they terminate my employment immediately, insisting that keeping a dangerous, toxic element like me on the payroll would undoubtedly result in a massive corporate lawsuit that would destroy their firm. The recording clicked off. The silence in my massive office was absolutely deafening. Marcus looked at me completely bewildered by the sheer audacity of the phone call. He asked if I wanted our aggressive legal department to draft a cease and desist order for defamation, slander, and corporate harassment. He was entirely ready to bury my sister in endless litigation before she even went to lunch. I looked out the window at the sprawling city below, feeling a cold, genuine smile slowly spread across my face. I shook my head and told Marcus to stand down his lawyers. I did not want to get mad. I wanted to let them dig their own graves. I looked back at my vice president of human resources and gave him a direct, unyielding order. I told him to draft a highly official corporate email on Aegis letterhead and send it directly to Brittany's work address at Lux Retail. I instructed him to thank her profusely for her outstanding corporate citizenship and her remarkable bravery in coming forward with such vital information. Then I told him to write one final definitive sentence, confirming that after a rapid internal review, the employee known as Simone has been successfully and permanently terminated effective immediately. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but nodded sharply, understanding exactly what kind of psychological warfare I was engaging in. I told him to let my sister pop the expensive champagne and celebrate her imaginary victory today because she had absolutely no idea what kind of hell I was bringing to her doorstep tomorrow. It was early Saturday morning when the fallout from Marcus sending that termination email finally arrived at my front door. I was standing in the massive chef's kitchen of my penthouse suite, pouring a fresh cup of espresso and looking out over the panoramic, unobstructed views of Lake Michigan. The morning was perfectly quiet and serene. I had barely taken my first sip when the private elevator that opened directly into my foyer chimed unexpectedly. The only people with override access to that specific elevator were building management and my personal security detail, so I naturally assumed my concierge was dropping off a high-priority package. Instead, the heavy oak doors slid open to reveal Patricia and Richard. They marched right off the elevator and stepped onto my imported marble floors, carrying a stack of flattened cardboard moving boxes. My mother dropped the cardboard boxes onto my pristine entryway rug with a loud, obnoxious thud. She crossed her arms and surveyed my living room with a look of absolute disgust. She inspected the custom velvet sectionals, the crystal chandelier, and the original artwork hanging on the walls, clearly convinced that every single item was entirely bought on credit. She wasted no time pretending to be a concerned parent checking on her daughter. She smiled a tight, vicious little smile and announced that Brittany had shared the fantastic news. According to Patricia, the universe had finally stepped in to teach me a harsh lesson about arrogance and disrespect. She said my sister was an absolute saint for calling my employer and getting me fired because it forced me to stop living a delusional, flashy lie. Richard stepped forward aggressively, adjusting his country club golf shirt, and told me the family had graciously held an emergency meeting to decide my fate. Since I was now completely unemployed and entirely useless to the corporate world, they had devised a master plan for me to pay off my mounting debts and earn my keep. He pointed at the flattened cardboard boxes on the floor and ordered me to start packing my things immediately. Their grand solution to my imaginary financial crisis was that I would surrender my luxury penthouse move back into their damp, unfinished basement and serve as a full-time unpaid nanny for Brittany and Malik. Patricia chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She added that taking care of my nephew and niece 24 hours a day would be my penance for humiliating Malik at the restaurant. She said that once I was living under their roof again, I could use whatever meager unemployment checks I collected to start paying them back for the food I ate and the electricity I used as a child. I stood perfectly still behind my kitchen island, holding my espresso cup, absolutely fascinated by the sheer depth of their delusion. I asked them calmly, what on earth made them think I would ever agree to surrender my peace and quiet, to become a glorified servant for a sister who just actively tried to ruin my career? Richard turned a deep shade of purple. He aggressively closed the distance between us, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings as he yelled that I had always been a colossal, ungrateful failure. He screamed that I was just renting a life I could not possibly afford, playing dress-up in a luxury high-rise, just like I tried to rent that expensive graduation gown they blatantly refused to pay for 8 years ago. He reminded me how I had to walk across my college stage in a cheap borrowed dress because I thought I was better than the family that raised me. He told me I was nothing but a fraud drowning in credit card debt and that I needed to submit to my betters before I ended up in jail. Patricia pulled out her cell phone and smugly declared that if I did not start packing my bags right this second, she was going to call the building management and have me physically thrown out onto the street as a jobless squatter. She said she would make sure my eviction was incredibly humiliating and painfully public, so all my wealthy neighbors could see the pathetic fraud I truly was. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of fear. I simply gestured toward the elevator with my free hand and told her to go right ahead and call them. Patricia furiously punched the button for the concierge on the wall panel, loudly demanding through the intercom that the building manager come up to the penthouse immediately to remove a highly belligerent delinquent tenant. We waited in tense, suffocating silence for exactly 3 minutes before the private elevator chimed again. Mr. Sterling, the impeccably dressed building manager, stepped into my foyer, flanked by 2 burly security guards in dark suits. Patricia immediately pointed her manicured finger at me, demanding that Mr. Sterling throw me out that very instant, because I had just lost my job and was completely incapable of paying the astronomical rent on this multi-million-dollar suite. She instructed the security guards to grab my arms and drag me to the service elevator. Mr. Sterling did not even look at my mother. He turned directly to me, gave a deep, respectful bow of his head, and asked if these unauthorized visitors were causing a disturbance that required police intervention. Patricia gasped in absolute outrage, her jaw dropping open in shock. But before she could scream at him for ignoring her commands, Mr. Sterling stepped smoothly past her and handed Richard a thick, laminated legal document. It was a permanent, legally binding trespass notice. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso and smiled at the 2 people who thought they could break me. I do not rent here, Dad. My real estate trust owns this entire building. Security escort them out. The heavy oak doors of the private elevator slid shut, instantly silencing Patricia's frantic, echoing screams. I stood perfectly still behind my kitchen island, listening to the mechanical hum of the elevator carrying my parents down 40 floors to the street level. Richard had not said a single word. When Mr. Sterling handed him that permanent trespass notice, the color had completely drained from my father's face. He had stared at the laminated paper as if it were written in an alien language, entirely incapable of processing the fact that the daughter he viewed as a worthless failure was the legal owner of a $50 million residential skyscraper. I looked down at the cheap flattened cardboard boxes they had dumped on my imported rug. They actually brought moving boxes to pack up my life. I picked them up, walked over to the disposal chute, and dropped them into the darkness. I went back to my kitchen counter, took another slow sip of my espresso, and smiled. 3 days later, the atmosphere inside the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was absolutely electric. It was the night of the Lux Retail Acquisition Gala. My firm Aegis Financial Analytics had officially purchased their entire flailing retail brand earlier that morning. The executives at Lux had spared absolutely no expense for the party, desperately hoping to impress their new corporate overlords and save their respective jobs. Massive, glittering ice sculptures carved into the shape of the company logo dominated the corners of the room. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided through the packed crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and vintage champagne. It was a spectacular display of borrowed wealth paid for entirely by the cash injection my company had just authorized. Right in the center of the ballroom, completely oblivious to the reality of her impending doom, stood Brittany. She was draped in a gaudy, sequined crimson gown that caught every flash of light, looking less like a corporate executive and more like a desperate reality television star. She held a crystal flute of champagne, practically vibrating with arrogance, as she paraded her family in front of her colleagues. Malik stood rigidly beside her, looking like a man marching toward a firing squad. The 48-hour grace period for his $2 million margin call had expired yesterday afternoon. His phone was buzzing relentlessly in his velvet jacket pocket. He was sweating completely through his shirt, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and vacant. Every single time he reached into his pocket to check the frantic notifications from his brokers, Brittany aggressively slapped his hand away. She hissed at him through a fake, brilliant smile, demanding that he stop ruining her perfect evening with his anxiety. She loudly announced to a circle of regional managers that the mysterious new CEO of the acquiring firm had personally requested her portfolio. She confidently boasted that her promotion to senior vice president was guaranteed to be announced before midnight. A few feet away, Patricia was holding court with the wives of the Lux Retail board members. I had specifically instructed my security team to allow my family entry to the gala, knowing exactly how they would behave once they were surrounded by an audience. Patricia held her wine glass with one hand and dramatically placed her other hand over her heart, perfectly, playing the role of the long-suffering, devoted mother. She leaned in closely to the chief financial officer's wife and let out a loud, theatrical sigh. She claimed that the family had just endured a terrible, heartbreaking tragedy with her youngest daughter. She spun a fabricated, highly delusional narrative to the executives. She completely erased the memory of being legally thrown out of my penthouse. Instead, she claimed I was a jobless, homeless disaster who had recently suffered a massive psychotic break. She told the wealthy women that I was caught squatting in an empty apartment pretending I owned the building and that the police had to forcibly drag me away. She shook her head in mock sorrow, stating that they had to cut me off entirely to protect the family from my violent instability. She then seamlessly pivoted, gesturing proudly toward Brittany. She claimed that her eldest daughter's incredible corporate success was the only thing keeping the family together during such a dark, painful time. The executives politely nodded, drinking in the toxic gossip, while praising Patricia for her incredible maternal strength. I stepped out of my chauffeur-driven Maybach and walked into the grand lobby of the Drake Hotel. I was wearing a bespoke razor-sharp obsidian power suit. The $80,000 Patek Philippe watch rested prominently on my wrist, catching the light of the lobby chandeliers. I did not pull my sleeve down to hide it this time. I walked toward the ballroom with 12 of my top executives falling into perfect synchronized formation right behind me. Inside the ballroom, the string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The overhead lights dimmed, casting an expectant hush over the hundreds of guests. The current president of Lux Retail stepped up to the microphone on the grand stage. He cleared his throat, his voice echoing loudly through the massive speakers. He announced that the moment had finally arrived to welcome the board of directors from Aegis Financial Analytics and to introduce the visionary founder and chief executive officer who had orchestrated the entire buyout. Brittany practically shoved her colleagues out of the way to get to the front of the crowd. She dragged Malik by the wrist, forcing Patricia and Richard to follow close behind her. She wanted to be the very first person the new CEO saw. She wanted to be front and center when her name was called for her massive promotion. The heavy mahogany double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a loud, resounding crack. A bright spotlight hit the entryway. My board of directors walked into the room, their expressions stone cold and strictly professional. The crowd murmured in absolute awe. The board members marched 10 paces forward, stopped in perfect unison, and then parted down the middle like the Red Sea. I stepped through the gap and walked directly into the blinding spotlight. I kept my head held high, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. I looked straight ahead and locked eyes with Brittany. The smug, triumphant smile melted off her face in a fraction of a second. Her jaw dropped open. Her crystal champagne flute slipped from her paralyzed fingers and shattered violently against the floor. Patricia let out a loud, genuine gasp of absolute terror, her hands flying to cover her mouth as the blood completely drained from her face. Richard stumbled backward, bumping heavily into a waiter and nearly collapsing into a table of hors d'oeuvres. Malik just stared at me, his legs giving out as the reality of his total financial ruin finally cemented itself in his mind. I stood at the center of the ballroom looking at the sister who had just called my HR department to get me fired and offered her a cold, unforgiving smile. I did not break eye contact with Brittany as I stepped over the shattered crystal of her dropped champagne flute. The crunch of glass under my designer heels was the only sound echoing in the completely silent ballroom. The crowd of elite executives parted for me, their faces painted with a mixture of absolute awe and sheer terror. As I glided past my family, I could hear Malik's ragged, shallow breathing. He was literally hyperventilating, his hands violently trembling at his sides as the reality of his massive margin call finally aligned with the absolute power I now wielded over his life. Richard was practically shrinking into his ill-fitting tuxedo, desperately trying to hide behind a massive floral arrangement. Patricia stood frozen in place, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. She was entirely unable to comprehend that the homeless psychotic squatter she had just spent 20 minutes gossiping about was currently marching up the steps to the grand stage. I stepped up to the acrylic podium and adjusted the microphone. I looked out over the sea of Lux Retail employees. The room was so incredibly quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning unit. "Good evening," I said, my voice carrying a smooth, razor-sharp authority that commanded immediate respect. "As your former president just announced, Aegis Financial Analytics has officially finalized the total acquisition of Lux Retail. We did not purchase this company to maintain the status quo. We bought it because we identified massive glaring inefficiencies in your corporate structure. My firm specializes in forensic restructuring. That means we are here to completely overhaul this brand, streamline operations, and most importantly, cut out the corporate dead weight that has been bleeding this company dry for years." A collective shudder rippled through the audience. The regional managers and senior vice presidents who had been drinking expensive vintage champagne just moments ago suddenly looked nauseous. They knew exactly what forensic restructuring meant in the corporate world. It meant ruthless financial audits, massive layoffs, and the immediate termination of anyone who had been coasting on a padded salary. I gripped the edges of the podium and let my cold gaze sweep across the room before landing squarely back on the center of the floor. My family looked like they wanted the polished marble to open up and swallow them whole. Transparency is a core value at Aegis. I continued amplifying my voice so it reached the very back of the massive ballroom. "So, in the spirit of total corporate transparency, I would like to take a moment to address a specific incident that occurred just this morning. I would like to personally thank your marketing director, Brittany, who recently called my human resources department to urgently request my termination. The entire ballroom collectively gasped. Hundreds of heads violently swiveled to stare directly at Brittany. The executives who had been forced to endure her arrogant boasting all evening now looked at her with pure unadulterated horror. Brittany's face turned a sickening shade of magenta. She physically recoiled, looking frantically around the room as the colleagues she had been trying to impress suddenly backed away from her. They treated her like she was actively contagious, leaving her standing entirely alone in the center of the room with Malik and my parents. "It was a bold move," I said, my voice dripping with lethal sarcasm. Calling the HR department of the acquiring firm to falsely accuse an employee of grand larceny and severe mental instability takes a very special kind of audacity. Unfortunately for her, firing the owner of the company is a logistical nightmare. The tense silence completely shattered. Hushed whispers erupted across the ballroom like wildfire. The executives were staring at Brittany with absolute disgust, quickly realizing that she had just tried to sabotage the very billionaire CEO who now held their careers in the palm of her hand. Patricia grabbed Richard's arm, looking like she was about to faint from the sheer magnitude of the public humiliation. The toxic narrative she had spun about my miserable, pathetic life had just been incinerated in front of the most elite corporate circle in the city. The sheer embarrassment finally snapped Brittany out of her paralyzed state. The reality that her entire corporate career, her social standing, and her desperate bid for a senior vice president title were currently going up in flames pushed her into absolute panic. She completely abandoned her sophisticated executive persona. She lunged forward, pushing past a group of terrified regional managers and tried to rush the stage. "Simone, wait!" Brittany cried out, her voice shrill and desperate, as she scrambled toward the short staircase. "Simone, please, we are sisters. We are family. You know I did not mean any of that. It was just a silly misunderstanding. We need to talk about this privately." Before her foot could even touch the first step, two of my massive stone-faced security guards stepped smoothly into her path. They moved with terrifying precision, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle and tailored suits between Brittany and the stage. They did not touch her, but their imposing presence forced her to stop dead in her tracks. I calmly stepped away from the podium. I walked down the short staircase and stopped on the bottom step, standing perfectly safe behind the broad shoulders of my security team. I looked down at my older sister. She was sweating her sequined crimson dress, looking cheap and ridiculous under the harsh stage lights. She was breathing heavily, her eyes wide with a frantic begging plea for mercy that I had absolutely no intention of granting. I reached out my right hand. Marcus, my vice president of human resources, stepped out from the shadows of the stage wing and placed a thick red manila folder directly into my palm. I held the heavy file up, making sure Brittany could clearly read the bold black letters printed across the front label. It was stamped with the Aegis corporate audit seal. "I am afraid we are entirely past the point of sisterly misunderstandings," I said, maintaining a chillingly calm tone as I handed the thick audit file directly into her trembling hands. "We need to talk about your expense report, sister. We need to talk about your expense report, sister." The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Brittany stared down at the red manila folder in her trembling hands as if it were a live grenade. She could not speak. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped the cardboard so tightly her knuckles turned entirely white. I did not wait for her to formulate a pathetic excuse. I turned to the two lead corporate attorneys standing to my right and gave them a subtle nod. They immediately flanked Brittany, gesturing politely but firmly toward the grand staircase that led to the mezzanine level. Overlooking the ballroom was the Lux Retail Executive Boardroom, a massive, soundproof glass enclosure designed to make the executives feel like gods looking down on their employees. Tonight, it would serve as an interrogation room. I walked up the stairs with measured, deliberate steps, knowing the eyes of every single person in the ballroom were glued to my back. Brittany was forced to follow, escorted by my legal team and surrounded by my security detail. It was a completely silent, agonizing walk of shame. Patricia and Richard tried to follow, desperately shouting my name from the base of the stairs, but my security guards firmly blocked their path, leaving my parents trapped on the ballroom floor to watch the impending destruction of their favorite child through a wall of soundproof glass. I stepped into the boardroom, walked directly to the head of the massive mahogany table, and took my seat. The heavy glass doors sealed shut behind us, instantly cutting off the music and the murmurs of the crowd below. It was perfectly quiet. I gestured toward the empty leather chair opposite me. Brittany collapsed into it. She dropped the red folder onto the polished wood as if it were burning her skin. She looked frantically through the glass wall at our parents pacing nervously below, then looked back at me. Her chest heaved with panicked, shallow breaths. "Open it!" I commanded, my voice echoing slightly in the vast, empty room. Brittany shook her head violently. She crossed her arms tightly over her sequined gown, reverting to the petulant, stubborn child she had always been when backed into a corner. I did not ask twice. I simply opened the duplicate file resting in front of me and pulled out a thick stack of highlighted forensic accounting reports. My firm did not just buy Lux Retail blindly. I began sliding a glossy photograph of a luxury sports car across the table toward her. We conducted a deep, exhaustive forensic audit of the entire corporate structure. We found massive bleeding wounds in the quarterly budgets. More specifically, we found you. I picked up the first page of the audit. "Let us review your activities for the last fiscal year, shall we?" In March, you authorized a $50,000 wire transfer from the corporate marketing budget for a supposed brand awareness retreat in St. Bart's. Our auditors verified that there were no clients present. It was just you, Malik, and a private yacht charter. Brittany swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the two corporate lawyers standing silently by the door. "That was team building," she stammered, her voice cracking. "It was a strategic networking opportunity." I did not let her finish. I pulled out another sheet of paper. "In April, you expensed $12,000 categorized under client appreciation gifts. Curiously, the vendor identification numbers perfectly match the receipts from the Hermes boutique on Oak Street. You bought yourself 3 Birkin bags and charged them to the company." And my personal favorite? I continued, sliding the photograph of the car closer to her. "Since last August, you have authorized a monthly recurring vendor consulting fee of $4,000 to a shell company registered in Delaware. Our team traced the routing numbers. Those corporate funds are directly paying the lease on Malik's Aston Martin." "That is a lie!" Brittany shouted, her voice shrill and desperate as she slapped her hand against the table. "You are making this up to ruin me because you have always been jealous of my success. You forged these documents." I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. "These are bank-verified wire transfers, IP logs, and digital receipts extracted directly from your secure corporate terminal. The paper trail is absolutely flawless. You have been treating this company like your own personal piggy bank to fund a lifestyle you could not actually afford. You stole hundreds of thousands of dollars to pretend you were rich." The reality of the evidence finally shattered her delusion. The arrogant, untouchable golden child completely vanished, replaced by a cornered, terrified fraud. Her perfectly styled hair fell into her face as she leaned across the mahogany table, her eyes wide with a frantic, unhinged energy. "I deserve this!" Brittany screamed, her voice echoing violently off the glass walls. "I am the face of this brand. I am the one who networks. I am the one who schmoozes these pathetic regional managers. Mom and Dad always said I was meant for greatness. They said the world owes me. I earned everything I took." I stared at her, absolutely repulsed by the sheer depth of her entitlement. She had been coddled and praised for so long that she genuinely believed the rules did not apply to her. I sat back in my chair, my expression completely devoid of any sympathy. "Mom and Dad owed you," I replied, my voice dangerously calm and icy cold. "The SEC does not." Brittany recoiled as if I had physically struck her. The mention of federal authorities instantly sucked the remaining defiance right out of her lungs. She began to shake uncontrollably. She looked down at the highlighted audit files scattered across the table, finally realizing that this was not a simple family argument she could manipulate her way out of. This was not about getting fired. This was about federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and tax evasion. You are looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison, I stated plainly, letting the silence emphasize the gravity of the threat. The moment I hand this file to the authorities, your life as you know it is entirely over. The cars, the vacations, the country club memberships, they are all gone. You are going to lose everything, Brittany. And Patricia and Richard will have to watch their perfect golden child be dragged out of a courtroom in handcuffs. Please, Brittany whispered, tears finally spilling over her mascara and running down her cheeks. Simone, please. You cannot do this to me. I will pay it back. I will figure out a way to pay back every single cent. Just let me resign. Let me walk away quietly. I looked at my older sister crying across the table. For years, she had taken immense pleasure in making me feel worthless. She had actively tried to destroy my career just days ago without a single ounce of hesitation. I felt absolutely no guilt. I closed my duplicate folder and tapped it neatly against the polished wood. I turned my head toward my lead corporate counsel. I extended my arm, holding the damning audit file out to him. Contact the federal authorities, I instructed the lawyer. Hand over all our forensic evidence to the SEC and initiate the criminal prosecution protocols immediately. The lawyer stepped forward, extending his hand to take the file that would seal Brittany's fate. Suddenly, a loud, violent crash shattered the quiet tension of the room. The heavy, soundproof glass door of the boardroom was violently kicked open, slamming hard against the interior wall. The glass shuddered under the immense impact. Malik stood in the doorway, his tuxedo jacket discarded, his tie ripped open, and his dress shirt soaked in nervous sweat. His chest heaved as he glared at me with desperate, unhinged fury. "You put that file down right now!" Simone, Malik demanded, his voice cracking with a dangerous, explosive panic. "You are going to back down, or I swear to God I will make you regret it." Malik stormed fully into the executive boardroom, his heavy footsteps echoing violently against the acoustic panels. He marched directly toward the head of the mahogany table, completely ignoring the two highly trained corporate security guards who instantly stepped off the wall to intercept him. His face was a dangerously dark shade of crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against his sweat-soaked collar. He slammed both of his fists down onto the polished wood, mere inches from my laptop, leaning his massive frame forward in a blatant, aggressive attempt to physically tower over me. The two security guards immediately unclipped the holsters at their waists, moving in to physically subdue him. I did not flinch. I did not lean back in my leather chair. I simply raised a single manicured finger into the air. The guards froze, instantly stepping back but remaining perfectly coiled to strike. I wanted to handle Malik myself. "You are going to rip up that audit right now," Malik sneered, spit flying from his lips as he pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are going to sign the paperwork making Brittany the senior vice president of marketing, and you are going to keep your mouth shut. We are your family, Simone. You owe us." When your very first startup went under 5 years ago, I was the one who graciously let you sleep on our brand new sectional sofa. I was the one who bought you groceries when you could not even afford a decent meal. You are just a bitter, jealous little girl playing dress-up with a corporate credit card, and I'm telling you to fix this right now for the sake of the family. I sat perfectly still, listening to the sheer, unadulterated delusion pouring out of his mouth. He genuinely believed he could intimidate the owner of a multi-billion-dollar financial firm by bringing up a bag of groceries he bought half a decade ago. I looked past his sweating, furious face and glanced through the soundproof glass walls of the boardroom. Down on the ballroom floor, Patricia and Richard were pacing frantically, staring up at the glass box, completely oblivious to the fact that their golden son-in-law was about to detonate a financial nuclear bomb right in the middle of their perfect suburban lives. I slowly leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, and met his crazed stare with absolute freezing calm. "You are in no position to issue demands, Malik." I reached down into the sleek leather briefcase resting against the leg of my chair. I bypassed the standard corporate files and pulled out a thick black portfolio stamped with a silver crest. I dropped it squarely on top of Brittany's red embezzlement audit. The heavy thud made Malik flinch. "Let us talk about your day trading addiction," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. You have been aggressively leveraging positions on volatile tech stocks for the last 18 months, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of massive wealth. Yesterday afternoon, Apex Trading hit you with a massive margin call. You are exactly $2 million in the red. They gave you a strict 48-hour grace period to cover the deficit, a period that expired at 3 o'clock today. Malik swallowed hard, the remaining color draining rapidly from his face. He stumbled backward, his aggressive posture collapsing entirely. "How do you know about Apex?" he choked out, his eyes darting frantically toward the black folder. "Because institutional lenders do not wait around for fake millionaires to find loose change in their couch cushions," I stated flatly. When an account defaults, this severely brokerage firms immediately package the toxic debt and sell it to private collection agencies for pennies on the dollar, just to clear it off their balance sheets. Apex Trading sold your toxic defaulted portfolio to a highly aggressive Tier 1 private equity firm early this morning, a firm that I personally own. I tapped the black folder with my index finger. "I own your debt, Malik, every single cent of it." Brittany let out a strangled, breathless gasp from the other side of the table. She looked at her husband with absolute horror, the realization dawning on her that the lavish lifestyle she had been bragging about all night was built entirely on a mountain of catastrophic debt. Malik shook his head wildly, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his trembling hand. "It does not matter," Malik stammered, his voice rising in panic. "I can cover the margin. Once you give Brittany her promotion and her signing bonus, we can restructure the payments. We will pay you back. We are family. Simone, you cannot ruin us." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed off the glass walls. "You are completely missing the most vital piece of the puzzle, Malik. A man with maxed out credit cards and a leased Aston Martin does not simply walk into a Tier 1 brokerage firm and secure a $2 million leverage account. Apex Trading requires pristine liquid collateral to underwrite that kind of high-risk margin." I opened the black folder and pulled out a single, heavily redacted legal contract. I slid the document smoothly across the mahogany table until it rested right in front of Brittany. "Read the collateral agreement, sister," I commanded. Brittany leaned forward, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the paper. She scanned the dense legal text, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror as she reached the bottom of the page. "You did not use your own money to secure that margin, Malik," I explained, making sure my voice was loud enough to drown out his pathetic, panicked whimpers. "You committed federal wire fraud. You bypassed dual authentication security and illegally forged the digital signatures of Richard and Patricia. You pledged their entire 401k retirement accounts and signed away the remaining equity on their house as the collateral for your failed gambling addiction." No, Brittany screamed a guttural, agonizing sound as she shoved the paper away and stared at her husband in total revulsion. "Tell me this is a lie, Malik. Tell me you did not steal Mom and Dad's retirement." Malik could not speak. He backed up against the glass wall, hyperventilating as he looked down at my parents, who were still staring up at the boardroom, completely unaware that their beloved son-in-law had just gambled away their entire life savings and the roof over their heads. He turned back to me, clasping his hands together in a desperate, pathetic, pleading motion. "Simone, please, I am begging you." Malik cried, tears streaming down his face as his knees buckled. "Do not do this. Please, for the sake of the family, do not call the dead in. I will do anything." My face turned to stone. I reached out toward the silver telecommunications console built directly into the center of the boardroom table. I looked directly into Malik's terrified, bloodshot eyes and pressed the flashing red intercom button that connected securely to my primary wealth management team. "I just notified Apex to execute the margin call," I announced, my voice devoid of any mercy. "You are officially bankrupt, Malik, and my parents are going to lose their house." Malik collapsed onto the plush carpeting of the boardroom as the finality of my words echoed through the intercom. The arrogant, posturing husband who had just kicked open my door was entirely gone, replaced by a hyperventilating shell of a man, realizing his fraudulent house of cards had just been vaporized. He clutched his chest, gasping for air, but I did not offer him a single glance of sympathy. The heavy mahogany door was still wide open, shattering the soundproof seal of the executive glass box. Over the ragged sounds of Malik breathing, a new commotion erupted from the grand staircase. Heavy, frantic footsteps pounded against the marble steps. Richard and Patricia burst into the boardroom, completely ignoring my security detail who stepped aside on my silent command. Richard was gripping his smartphone so tightly, his knuckles were bone white. His face was a terrifying mask of purple rage. Just seconds ago, down in the ballroom, his bank had sent a catastrophic cascade of automated fraud alerts directly to his phone. The notification was blunt and uncompromising. His entire retirement portfolio, every single mutual fund, and the deed to his suburban home had been instantly frozen and seized by Apex Trading to cover a defaulted margin call. He marched directly toward my side of the table, shoving past his sobbing son-in-law. He slammed his phone down onto the glass surface, the screen displaying the zero balance of his life savings. "What did you just do?" Richard screamed, the veins in his neck bulging as he glared down at me. "My accounts are frozen. The bank just seized the house." "What kind of sick, twisted game are you playing with our lives, Simone?" I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up. I simply tapped the heavily redacted collateral contract sitting in front of his precious eldest daughter. "I did not do anything to your accounts, Richard," I replied, my tone deliberately flat and clinical. "Malik forged both of your digital signatures to secure a $2 million leverage loan for his day trading addiction. He lost the money. The broker called in the debt. Your golden son-in-law just gambled away your retirement and the roof over your head." I expected shock. I expected Richard to turn around and violently confront the man who had just stolen decades of his hard-earned money. I expected Patricia to scream at the man who had bankrupted her. Instead, I witnessed a masterclass in psychological delusion. Patricia rushed to Malik, dropping to her knees to wrap her arms protectively around the very man who had just financially ruined her. She glared up at me with absolute unfiltered hatred. "He is family!" Patricia shrieked, holding a sobbing Malik against her shoulder. "He was just trying to provide for Brittany. He would have won the money back. You are a billionaire, Simone. You own the trading firm. You could have quietly erased the debt. You could have fixed this without destroying our lives. You did this to us on purpose because you are a vindictive, hateful child." The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the cold air of the boardroom. She was actively shielding a federal criminal while blaming me for his crimes simply because I refused to cover his multi-million-dollar theft. Richard slammed his fist against the table, demanding my immediate compliance. "You are going to pick up that phone right now and call your brokers," he ordered, his voice dripping with the familiar dictatorial entitlement of my childhood. "You are going to authorize a complete release of our assets. You are going to pay off whatever Malik owes, and you are going to restore our accounts to their full balance. You have the money. It is pennies to you. You owe this family, and you are going to fix this mess." I slowly leaned back in my leather chair, perfectly calm amidst their collective hysteria. "I owe you nothing," I stated, staring directly into Richard's furious eyes. "You made your bed when you stood in my penthouse and demanded I become an unpaid servant to a sister who actively tried to ruin my career. You co-signed Brittany's delusion. Now you get to co-sign Malik's bankruptcy. The margin call stands. You will be vacating your home by the end of the month." Patricia scrambled to her feet, abandoning Malik on the floor. She marched right up to the edge of the mahogany table, pointing a manicured finger aggressively at my face. She decided to deploy the only weapon she thought she had left. "You think you are so untouchable up here in your glass tower?" Patricia spat, her voice trembling with venomous spite. "If you do not unfreeze those accounts right this second, I am going straight to the press. I will call the Wall Street Journal. I will call every local news station in this city. I will tell them exactly what kind of monster runs Aegis Financial Analytics." She leaned closer, her eyes manic. "I will tell them how you financially abuse your elderly parents. I will paint you as a ruthless, soulless corporate tyrant who threw her own mother and father out onto the street just to satisfy a petty childhood grudge. I will turn you into a public relations nightmare. I will tank your company's stock by morning. You will be the most hated woman in the corporate world. Unfreeze the accounts, Simone, or I will destroy your reputation." The silence that followed her threat was profound. My legal team tensed, ready to intervene, but I raised my hand to stop them. I looked at my mother, analyzing the desperate cornered animal she had become. "Go ahead," I replied, my voice smooth as silk. "Call the press, Patricia. Call the Wall Street Journal. Tell them how your son-in-law committed federal wire fraud and embezzled your retirement. Tell them how you tried to extort a billionaire CEO to cover up a felony. And while you are at it, make sure you mention that this entire boardroom is actively recording audio and video for corporate security purposes." Patricia froze her eyes instinctively, darting up to the sleek black security cameras mounted discreetly in the corners of the ceiling. The color drained from her face as the reality of her extortion attempt fully registered. "A public relations war requires two things, Mother." I continued, my gaze pinning her in place. "Unimpeachable credibility and massive amounts of capital. You currently possess neither. If you utter a single word to the press, my legal team will bury you in so much defamation litigation you will not even be able to afford a cardboard box to live in. Now step back." Patricia stumbled backward as if she had been shoved. Her threat was entirely neutralized, leaving her utterly powerless. I dismissed her from my attention and turned my focus back to the primary target. Brittany had been sitting entirely paralyzed in her chair throughout the entire exchange, clutching the red audit folder like a shield. She looked completely hollowed out, watching her husband sob on the floor, and her parents realized they were homeless. I reached into my briefcase one final time. I pulled out a crisp white envelope and a thick, legally binding contract printed on heavy bond paper. I slid them slowly across the polished wood until they rested perfectly next to her embezzlement audit. "Your husband's financial ruin is a separate legal matter from your corporate theft," I told Brittany, my tone shifting to pure, unyielding business. "You stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from Lux Retail. I have the digital receipts, the vendor logs, and the explicit proof of your embezzlement. The federal authorities would be thrilled to prosecute a high-profile fraud case." Brittany stared at the white envelope, her hands shaking violently. "What is that?" she choked out, barely able to form the words. "That is a non-disclosure agreement and a revised employment contract," I explained, tapping the heavy paper. "I am offering you a singular, non-negotiable lifeline. You have a choice, sister. You can walk out of this room right now, and I will hand your audit directly to the authorities. You will go to federal prison for corporate embezzlement, and you will share a cell block while your husband answers for wire fraud." I leaned forward, dropping the final crushing blow. "Or you can sign that contract. You will surrender your current title. You will forfeit all bonuses and equity, and you will accept a permanent, non-negotiable demotion to become my personal entry-level junior assistant. Choose wisely. Choose wisely." The words hung over the mahogany table, sharp and absolute. Brittany stared at the stark black ink of the demotion contract. Her hands shook so violently that the heavy bond paper vibrated against the polished wood. She looked up at me, her eyes begging for a sliver of the sisterly affection she had spent 3 decades actively destroying. She found absolutely nothing. My face was a mask of corporate execution. Brittany looked wildly toward the glass wall, seeking salvation from our mother. Patricia was paralyzed, her manicured hands covering her mouth as she stared at the wreckage of her entire world. Richard was slumped against the glass, his eyes vacant, fully comprehending that Malik had gambled away his retirement. Nobody was going to save the golden child tonight. With a ragged, humiliated sob, Brittany reached out and picked up the heavy silver pen resting beside the contract. Her tears splashed onto the signature lines, smudging the ink as she hastily scrawled her name. She pushed the paper across the table, completely defeated. "Corporate card," I demanded, extending my open palm. Brittany blinked, still struggling to process her new reality. I did not give her time to hesitate. I snapped my fingers. "Hand it over, Brittany. The platinum card, the keys to the executive washroom, your VIP parking garage pass, and your security clearance badge. You no longer hold a vice president title, which means you no longer require executive privileges." Her face flushed a deep, sickening crimson. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she unclasped her designer clutch. She pulled out the heavy metal corporate card she had used to fund her fraudulent, glamorous life and dropped it into my hand. The parking pass and security badge followed. Each item hit the mahogany table with a quiet, final clatter. "Marcus," I said, turning to my vice president of human resources who stood silently by the door. "Escort my new junior assistant to her former office. Provide her with one standard cardboard banker's box. She has exactly 15 minutes to remove her personal items before security locks the suite." Brittany gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Simone, please, I have years of files in there. I have awards. I have personal artwork. You cannot make me pack up my entire life in 15 minutes. "You are right," I replied smoothly, rising from my leather chair. "You do not have years of files. Those belong to Aegis Financial Analytics now. You may take your framed photos and your desk plant. Everything else is corporate property. Move." My security guards flanked her instantly. They did not touch her, but their imposing physical presence forced her to stand up. She stumbled toward the heavy glass doors. Patricia rushed forward, grabbing Brittany by the shoulders and pulling her into a desperate, clinging hug. They wept together, a tragic portrait of entitlement completely shattered. I walked past them without breaking my stride. I led the procession out of the boardroom and down the grand staircase, stepping back onto the ballroom floor. The gala had been suspended in a state of terrified limbo. Hundreds of Lux retail employees stood frozen, holding their champagne flutes, watching the spectacle unfold. We marched down the main executive corridor. The regional managers and department heads who had endured Brittany's arrogant tyranny for years now lined the glass walls of their offices. They watched in sheer, unadulterated awe as the untouchable marketing queen was marched down the hall by armed security. We reached the end of the corridor. Brittany's corner office was a ridiculous monument to her ego. It featured panoramic views of the city skyline, white leather sofas, and a massive marble desk. Marcus stepped inside and placed a single cheap cardboard box directly onto the pristine marble. "Your 15 minutes starts now," Marcus stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. Brittany lunged for her desk, weeping hysterically as she began shoving her expensive silver picture frames, her designer makeup bags, and her crystal paperweights into the cheap brown box. She looked pathetic. The glamorous, terrifying executive persona she had worn for years was gone, replaced by a frantic, broken woman stuffing her life into a cardboard cube. Patricia stood in the doorway, absolutely horrified. She clutched Richard's arm, her eyes wide with disbelief as she watched her perfect daughter being stripped of her crown. "This is inhumane," Patricia hissed at me, her voice shaking with venom. "You are enjoying this. You are a sick, twisted girl, Simone. She is your sister. She is a vice president. She is a felon who just signed a plea bargain to avoid a federal indictment," I corrected, not even bothering to look at my mother. "And you are a woman who has exactly 29 days to pack up her own house before my collection agency changes your locks. I suggest you go home and start finding boxes of your own." Patricia's mouth snapped shut. The reality of her own impending homelessness finally silenced her completely. "Time is up," Marcus announced, stepping forward. Brittany grabbed the cardboard box, her knuckles white. She looked around her luxurious corner office one last time. A fresh wave of tears spilling down her face as my security guard stepped forward and ushered her out into the hallway. "Follow me," I commanded. I did not lead her toward the elevators. I led her away from the executive wing, marching her straight toward the administrative sector. The plush carpeting gave way to industrial gray tiles. The panoramic glass offices transitioned into a sea of cramped beige cubicles. The administrative staff, the people Brittany had openly mocked and treated like dirt, stared openly as we approached. I stopped precisely outside the massive double doors of the CEO suite, my new office. Right outside the heavy oak doors sat a tiny windowless cubicle. It was gray, claustrophobic, and entirely isolated from the rest of the floor. It had a cheap laminate desk, a plastic chair, and a standard-issue computer terminal. I gestured toward the gray box. "Put your things down, Brittany." Brittany stood frozen, her eyes darting from the tiny cubicle to my face. "You cannot be serious," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Simone, I cannot work in here. There is no window. There is no space. People will see me." "You are a junior assistant," I replied, my voice carrying clearly across the silent floor. Junior assistants do not get corner offices with skyline views. They sit where they are told. "Put the box down." She slowly lowered the cardboard box onto the cheap laminate desk. She looked completely defeated, a ghost of the woman who had tormented me my entire life. Patricia let out a strangled sob from the hallway, completely unable to bear the sight of her favorite child sitting in a windowless cage. I turned around and walked into my new CEO suite. I walked over to the massive executive desk and picked up a heavy plastic bin. It was overflowing with thousands of faded, crinkled, completely disorganized corporate receipts dating back 5 years. I walked back out to the cubicle and slammed the massive bin down onto Brittany's desk. The impact rattled her cardboard box, nearly knocking over her framed photos. She jumped back, staring at the mountain of paper in pure horror. Aegis Financial requires a complete physical audit of all historical expenses, I said, leaning down so my face was merely inches from hers. Sort these chronologically, cross-reference them with the digital ledgers, and flag any discrepancies. I straightened my suit jacket and looked down at her with absolute authority. Sort these by 5 o'clock. Welcome to the bottom of the food chain. I walked into my massive suite and let the heavy oak doors click shut, leaving Brittany completely alone in her gray box with a plastic bin of crumpled paper. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the reality of her new existence had fully set in. She arrived at the office wearing a subdued off-the-rack pantsuit, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. She walked tentatively toward my desk, holding a legal pad, waiting for me to acknowledge her. I did not look up from my quarterly projections. I slid a yellow sticky note across the polished mahogany. It contained the highly specific customized coffee orders for the entire executive board. 8 years ago, on the morning of my very first corporate interview, Brittany had stood in the foyer of our parents' house and intentionally dumped a scalding Americano directly onto my only tailored blazer. She had laughed, claiming I was too pathetic and poorly dressed to ever survive in a real boardroom anyway, forcing me to attend the interview in a damp-stained shirt. Today, she returned to the suite 20 minutes later, her wrists physically trembling under the weight of a flimsy cardboard tray holding 6 oversized cups. She approached my desk, terrified of spilling a single drop on the marble floor. She placed my black coffee onto the leather coaster with painstaking care. I placed my hand against the side of the paper cup. "The temperature is incorrect," I stated flatly, keeping my eyes fixed entirely on my monitor. "Go back down to the lobby and have them remake it." Brittany choked back a ragged sob. She spun on her heel, grabbed the cup, and practically ran out of the office. I offered absolutely zero emotional response. That was the specific tactic that was slowly driving her insane. She desperately craved a screaming match. She wanted me to gloat, to yell, to rub my wealth in her face so she could play the victim and manipulate the narrative. By treating her like a nameless, faceless piece of office machinery, I systematically stripped away the last remaining shreds of her power. The week dragged on, transforming into a grueling physical nightmare for her. The woman who used to spend her afternoons taking 3-hour lunches at 5-star restaurants was now sprinting across the building delivering mail. I made her organize the supply closets. I forced her to manually shred hundreds of outdated legal documents until her perfectly manicured nails were chipped and ruined. Every time she tried to initiate a personal conversation, trying to leverage our shared childhood to gain a momentary reprieve, I simply handed her another stack of files to alphabetize. By Thursday afternoon, the psychological toll was absolute. Aegis Financial Analytics was hosting a critical multi-million-dollar acquisition pitch. We were finalizing a massive retail partnership with the Vanguard Group. The Vanguard Executive Board included Victoria Sterling and Chloe Vance. These were women Brittany had played tennis with every Tuesday at the exclusive Oak Ridge Country Club. They were the elite socialites she had spent thousands of stolen corporate dollars trying to impress. 10 minutes before the Vanguard executives were scheduled to arrive, I summoned Brittany to my desk. I handed her a dry cleaning ticket. "Go to the tailor on the ground floor and retrieve my suits," I instructed. "Be quick about it." I timed the collision perfectly. I was standing in the center of the glass-walled executive lobby shaking hands with Victoria and Chloe when the main elevator doors chimed open. Brittany stepped out. She was struggling to carry 3 heavy plastic-wrapped suits draped over one arm while balancing a massive tray of catered sandwiches in the other hand. Her hair was frizzy from the humidity outside, and her cheap blazer was wrinkled. Victoria actually gasped, taking a step back in sheer shock. "Brittany, what on earth are you doing?" Brittany froze like a deer in headlights. The color drained entirely from her face. One of the heavy suit bags slipped from her shoulder, landing on the floor with a pathetic swoosh. She tried to smile desperately, trying to project her old, arrogant country club persona. "Victoria, Chloe, I am just restructuring my workflow. I am taking a hands-on approach to the new corporate transition." I stepped smoothly forward and picked up my dry cleaning from the floor. My junior assistant is still adjusting to the pace of the administrative sector, I told the Vanguard executives, my voice perfectly polite and entirely dismissive. "Brittany, take the catering to the main conference room and wipe down the whiteboards before you take your 15-minute lunch break." The absolute humiliation hit Brittany with the force of a freight train. Victoria and Chloe looked at her not with anger, but with pure, unfiltered pity. They looked at the former queen of the country club as if she were the hired help. Brittany's chest heaved. She scrambled to adjust the sandwich tray, ducked her head, and practically sprinted down the hallway to escape their staring eyes. The utter degradation finally broke whatever fragile restraint she had left. Hidden inside the main conference room, her humiliation curdled into a toxic, reckless rage. She was setting up the water glasses when she noticed my master presentation laptop resting unattended on the podium. I was still out in the lobby giving the clients a brief tour of the architectural models. Brittany knew her basic administrative access codes still worked on the local network. She slipped behind the podium and opened the presentation file. It took her less than 30 seconds. She accessed the master slide deck for the Vanguard acquisition. She highlighted the core financial projections, the margin analysis, and the 10-year growth models that justified the entire buyout. She hit delete, permanently corrupted the backup autosave file, and quietly slipped out the back door of the boardroom. 10 minutes later, I stood at the head of the massive mahogany table. The Vanguard executives sat comfortably holding their branded pens and watching me expectantly. Brittany stood in the far back corner of the room holding a notepad. A sinister, triumphant smirk had finally returned to her face. She was waiting for me to publicly fail, waiting for my billion-dollar deal to collapse in front of the very women she wanted to impress. I picked up the laser pointer. I confidently pressed the button to bring up the primary financial models. The massive projector screen behind me flashed bright white hist, and then displayed a massive fatal file error message. The harsh blue light of the error screen illuminated the room, casting an icy glow across the faces of the Vanguard executives. Victoria and Chloe shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, exchanging a quick, concerned glance. In the back corner of the boardroom, Brittany stood with her arms crossed over her cheap, wrinkled pantsuit. A toxic, triumphant smirk was plastered across her face. She shifted her weight, practically vibrating with eager anticipation. She was waiting for me to apologize. She was waiting for me to sweat to panic, to crumble into a pathetic, flustered mess in front of the most powerful women in the retail sector. I looked at the fatal error message flashing on the massive screen. I looked at Brittany. I did not blink. I did not offer a single word of apology to my clients. I reached out and calmly pressed the master power switch on the podium console. The projector hummed and powered down, plunging the front of the room back into sophisticated ambient lighting. I stepped away from the podium, abandoning the useless laptop entirely, and walked directly to the center of the mahogany table. "Ladies, a digital slide deck is merely a visual crutch for executives who do not intimately understand their own capital," I said, my voice steady, smooth, and absolute. "Let us talk raw, unfiltered numbers." I launched directly into the pitch. I used no notes. I referenced no visuals. I delivered pure, unadulterated financial mastery. Vanguard's current retail acquisitions are suffering a 12% attrition rate due to outdated logistical algorithms, I stated, pacing slowly at the head of the table. Aegis Financial Analytics has developed a proprietary predictive margin analysis model. By restructuring your debt to equity ratio and liquidating your underperforming regional assets, we project a 24% revenue increase within the first 36 months. I did not stop there. I rattled off complex algorithms, quarterly yield projections, and international market volatility metrics with flawless precision. Our 10-year growth models indicate that absorbing Lux Retail's supply chain infrastructure will reduce your overhead by $40 million annually. I continued my gaze sweeping between Victoria and Chloe. We accomplished this by entirely restructuring corporate vendor contracts, executing aggressive tax deferment strategies, and eliminating bloated, unnecessary executive compensation packages. I let my eyes drift to Brittany on that last sentence. Her triumphant smirk instantly vanished. The realization hit my older sister like a physical blow to the chest. She had actually believed that deleting a digital file would break me.